The morning of December 12th, 2025, dawned bright and beautiful in Los Angeles. But for Hope Logan, it felt like a perfect fade masking a lifetime of secrets. She stood in her childhood bedroom, staring at herself in the mirror, wearing a delicate white wedding dress that suddenly felt far too tight around her middle. No one knew yet. No one could know not on her wedding day. But the truth was growing inside her, day by day, hour by hour. And soon the entire world would discover that her miraculous reunion with Liam Spencer was built on a foundation of devastating uncertainty. The wedding ceremony itself was perfection. Deacon walked Hope down the aisle as tears of joy streamed down countless faces. Beth, their precious daughter, stood at the altar as the officiant, her young voice trembling with emotion as she pronounced her parents husband and wife once more. Liam looked at Hope with such overwhelming love, such certainty that finally, after all the pain and heartbreak, they had found their way home to each other. Hope smiled through her own tears, desperately wanting to believe it was true. The reception that followed was filled with dancing, laughter, and heartfelt speeches from family and friends who had waited years for this moment. But beneath the celebration, Hope felt nothing but dread. The impossible timeline. Just 1 week earlier, Hope Logan's world had collapsed when she discovered two pink lines on a pregnancy test. The shock was surpassed only by the crushing realization of what those 2 lines truly meant. As she stared at the test in disbelief, her mind raced backward through the chaotic timeline of the past few weeks. A calendar of intimate moments with 2 different men that she couldn't reconcile with mathematical certainty. The complicated timeline began when Liam revealed he had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. The news devastated Hope, sending her into a spiral of grief and desperation. She had rushed to his side, desperate to hold onto him as he faced this terminal diagnosis. During that dark period, they had shared an intimate moment of connection driven by the fear of losing him forever. It was meant to be goodbye, a final gesture of love in what Hope believed was their last chance. But then came the shocking revelation. Liam's cancer diagnosis was fake. Grace Buckingham, a woman with her own complicated motives, had fabricated the entire illness and even drugged him to convince everyone, including Liam himself, that he was dying. The relief at learning he would live was overwhelming, but it also brought Hope and Liam crashing back together with renewed intensity. Within just 3 or 4 days of their first intimate moment, they were together again, giving into the emotional current that had always pulled them toward each other. In the chaos surrounding Liam's recovery, Hope had also struggled with her relationship with Carter Walton. Carter had grown increasingly frustrated with Hope's emotional oscillation, her inability to fully commit as she grappled with the uncertainty of Liam's condition. On a desperate night, before everything fell apart, Hope and Carter had come together one final time, a last attempt to salvage what they had built. But it was too late. Within hours, the revelation about Liam's fake illness changed everything. Now, facing a positive pregnancy test, Hope realized with stomach-churning dread that she couldn't determine which man was the father. 3 or 4 days separated her intimate encounter with Carter from the one with Liam. Either man could be the father of the child growing inside her. The biological window of conception was impossibly narrow, and the dates, no matter how many times she recalculated them using pregnancy apps and careful timeline tracking, refused to provide the answer she so desperately needed. The weight of silence. For weeks, Hope carried her secret alone, a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. She couldn't tell Brooke, who had been so vocally supportive of Hope's reunion with Liam. She couldn't tell Liam, who was planning their wedding with such joy and certainty. She couldn't tell Carter, who had finally begun moving forward with his life alongside Daphne Rose, a sophisticated French perfumer who had entered Los Angeles with determination to win his heart. Instead, Hope threw herself into the role of bride-to-be. She wore loose clothing and blamed her fatigue on stress from the ongoing drama at Forrester Creations, where Eric Forrester had been forced into retirement and power dynamics had shifted dramatically. She avoided situations where alcohol might be expected, declined coffee that had always been her lifeblood, and developed a sudden aversion to foods she normally loved. Her hands would tremble during business meetings, and she found herself clutching her stomach, hoping no one would notice. But secrets in Los Angeles don't stay buried for long, especially when they threaten the carefully constructed lives of multiple people. The unraveling. It was Brooke who finally saw through Hope's carefully constructed facade. As Hope's mother, Brooke had an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was wrong. She noticed the emotional exhaustion written across Hope's face, the way her daughter's eyes grew distant and haunted when anyone mentioned the future or spoke about building a family together. One evening in the Forrester Design office, after everyone else had left, Brooke cornered her daughter with the kind of maternal intensity that no one could resist. "Sweetheart, you need to tell me what's going on," Brooke said, her voice steady but filled with concern. "And don't say it's nothing. I've known you your entire life." The carefully constructed walls that Hope had built came crashing down. Tears streamed down her face as she finally spoke the words aloud. "I'm pregnant, Mom, and I don't know if Carter or Liam is the father." Brooke's face went pale. It was a worst-case scenario she hadn't even considered, a complication that threatened everything Hope and Liam had worked toward, and everything Carter had finally begun to rebuild with Daphne. Confessions and confrontations. Telling Liam was the hardest conversation Hope had ever endured. They were at the cabin, Beth asleep upstairs, when Hope finally gathered the courage to speak the truth. She watched Liam's face transform from confusion to growing concern as she explained the impossible timeline, the uncertainty, the devastating possibility that the child she was carrying might not be his. "How could you?" Liam's voice was barely above a whisper, and the hurt in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. "We were building something. Hope. Beth was so happy. I was so happy. And all this time, you weren't even sure." Hope desperately tried to explain the circumstances, how quickly everything had happened, how the dates had blurred together in a nightmare of uncertainty, but nothing she said could erase the betrayal he felt. This was supposed to be a new beginning for them, a second chance that they both desperately needed. Instead, it felt like history repeating itself, like their love story was destined to be derailed by complications neither of them could control. Liam left the cabin that night without another word, leaving Hope alone with her guilt and her fear. Carter's heartbreak. Telling Carter was, in its own way, even more excruciating. Hope found him at Forrester Creations late one evening, reviewing contracts in his office. Daphne had just left. Hope could still smell her signature perfume lingering in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the life Carter was building without her. The conversation was emotionally devastating for both of them. Carter had finally reached a place where he could smile again, where he was beginning to envision a future that didn't revolve around Hope Logan. He had started to fall in love with Daphne, to imagine what it might be like to build something new with someone who saw him clearly and wanted to be with him unconditionally. "I had just started to move on," Carter said quietly, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying the emotional turmoil beneath. "Daphne and we were building something real. And now you're telling me that everything might change, that I might be a father." "I'm so sorry," Hope whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen, Hope," Carter replied, and the resignation in his voice was almost worse than anger. "And now we're all going to pay the price." Daphne's dreams shattered. When Carter told Daphne about Hope's pregnancy, the perfumer's carefully composed facade finally cracked. She had invested months of emotional energy into winning Carter's heart, had slowly and deliberately positioned herself as the woman he deserved. She had worked tirelessly to make him see that he could have a future beyond Hope Logan, a future with someone who could appreciate him fully and completely. And now Hope Logan was threatening to take it all away. "So, you're just going to go back to her?" Daphne demanded, her French accent thickening with emotion. "After everything she put you through? After she chose Liam over you again and again?" Carter stood frozen, unable to offer the reassurance she desperately needed, unable to promise that his life wouldn't change. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he finally admitted. "But if that baby is mine, Daphne, I can't walk away from my child. You have to understand that." Daphne understood all too well. The pain of that understanding was precisely what broke her heart. The DNA test. The decision to pursue a paternity test was inevitable, though the emotional toll of waiting for the results was devastating for everyone involved. Hope moved through her days in a fog, caught between two men who both had legitimate claims on her future. Liam kept his distance, communicating only about Beth through carefully worded text messages that felt like ice. Carter remained professional at work, but the hope and fear warring in his eyes told the story his words wouldn't. Dr. Bridget Forrester agreed to oversee the test, ensuring there would be no question about its validity or accuracy. The samples were taken, sent to the lab, and then came the agonizing wait days that felt like years as Hope, Carter, and Liam all grappled with the possibility of parenthood or the loss of it. Would Hope's baby belong to her ex-husband, the man she had always loved, or would it bind her forever to the ambitious attorney who had stood by her through the Forrester takeover? The waiting was torture. Every morning brought a new wave of anxiety. Every evening was spent hoping that tomorrow would bring clarity and closure, or dreading what that closure might mean. The results that changed everything. The day Bridget called with the results, Hope's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. "I need you to come to the hospital," Bridget said gently, but with unmistakable gravity. "And you should bring both Carter and Liam." The waiting room at the hospital felt like a courtroom. Hope sat between the two men who had shaped her recent history, each of them lost in their own thoughts. No one spoke. The silence was heavy with the weight of impending revelation, the kind of moment that would reshape all of their lives forever, regardless of the outcome. When Bridget finally emerged, her professional expression gave nothing away. She suggested discussing the results in private, but Hope insisted on transparency. "No, whatever you have to say, they both need to hear it. We've all been in this together. We might as well finish it together." Bridget took a deep breath and delivered the news that would change everything. The test results show a 99.9% probability that Carter Walton is the father of Hope's baby. Time seemed to stop in that moment. Hope felt her world reshape itself around those words. Carter was going to be a father. Their child, the manifestation of their relationship, would be born into this complicated emotional landscape. Their connection would now last forever, whether they wanted it or not, whether they could find their way back to each other, or whether they remained forever entangled in obligation and complicated feelings. Aftermath, the pieces don't fit back together. Liam stood abruptly, his face a mask of pain. "I guess that's it then. Beth will be devastated." He walked out without looking back, leaving Hope with tears streaming down her face, watching the father she had married just days before abandon her without a word. Carter sat frozen, processing the magnitude of what he had just learned. He was going to be a father not with some woman he had yet to meet, not in some distant future he could plan for, but with Hope, the woman who had torn his heart apart, the woman he was supposed to be getting over, the woman who was supposed to be his past, not his future. Carter left the hospital in a daze, pulling out his phone to call Daphne. He needed to explain, to somehow make her understand that everything had changed, that the careful plans they had been making were no longer possible. But when she answered, her voice was already distant, already grieving the future she had imagined. "It's yours, isn't it?" Daphne said before he could speak. "The baby is yours." "Yes," Carter replied, hearing the finality in that single word. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Daphne's soft crying. "Then I think we both know what this means," she said. "Carter, you need to be with Hope now for your child. And I need to go." Before Carter could protest, Daphne continued, "I hope you find the happiness you deserve, even if it's not with me." The line went dead. A new reality. In the weeks that followed, Los Angeles adjusted to the new reality. Hope and Carter began the difficult process of figuring out how to co-parent a child neither of them had planned for. Their conversations were awkward and careful, filled with long pauses as they navigated the wreckage of what might have been. Liam threw himself into being the best father he could be to Beth, determined to show his daughter that families could come in different forms, that love wasn't always simple or straightforward. But the hurt in his eyes, when he looked at Hope, was unmistakable a betrayal that would take far longer than a DNA test to heal. Daphne Rose booked a flight back to Paris, unable to bear watching Carter and Hope build a life around their unexpected child. She had come to Los Angeles looking for love and found only heartbreak. She needed distance, needed to heal, needed to forget the man she had almost had. Hope placed her hand on her stomach and wondered how something so small could change so many lives. She had wanted certainty, had desperately craved knowing which path her future would take. Now she had her answer, but it came with a price none of them had been prepared to pay. The bold and beautiful legacy. This is the story of the bold and the beautiful, a show built on passion, timing, and the complicated reality that sometimes our most significant life choices are made in moments of vulnerability and confusion. Hope Logan's pregnancy became less about the expected joy of motherhood and more about the ripple effects of intimacy, desire, and the desperate need to hold onto people we love. Her wedding day, the celebration of her renewed commitment to Liam Spencer, had been built on false hope. The marriage certificate would soon become a document of complications rather than completion. And the man whose child she carried would not be the man standing at the altar, but the man she had tried to leave behind. This is the power of the bold and the beautiful. The ability to take a moment of human vulnerability and transform it into a story that resonates with millions who have faced their own impossible choices, their own uncertain timelines, their own desperate hopes that circumstances might align in their favor. In Los Angeles, as the sun sets over the city, Hope Logan walks through Forrester Creations with her growing secret becoming increasingly visible. Carter Walton grapples with unexpected fatherhood. Liam Spencer nurses a freshly broken heart, and Daphne Rose prepares to leave Los Angeles behind, all because of 3 days, a calendar of uncertainty, and a DNA test that answered one question while creating countless others. This is daytime drama at its finest, when joy turns to heartbreak, when love becomes complicated, and when the future none of them planned becomes the only future available.